So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. And just before we get started, the response to the new conquest stuff that I posted up was actually pretty positive, which I'm glad about because I look forward to doing more of that in the future. And indeed, I do have another one that I'm going to be doing later on this week at some point. It will be the video that follows on from this one, so 2 or 3 days after this one is released. And today's video was actually going to be a scenario as well, but unfortunately the map version that they used for it no longer exists because it's already been updated, and unfortunately at the time of me being given the replay I was unfortunately given the newer version rather than the old version, so I will not be able to do that scenario or show that scenario unless it is done again on the newer version, which is unfortunate because I heard that it was very much a defensive focused one with a lot of emphasis on archers, which people do tend to enjoy to a certain extent, so a little bit unfortunate there. But as it is, we do have another attack defense sort of situation going on here. It's not a scenario, but it is nonetheless, it will function very similar to one because of how this settlement works. This is of course Moria, a map which has been in ever since vanilla Third Age. It's obviously very choke pointy, very emphasis on being a bit more of a grind, but fortunately we should see quite a lot of aggression coming from the attacks. We'll start off with this attacking army, the Witcher of Angmar, played by Second Pink, who once again this was one of the maps that he has sent me within the past couple of weeks, and I'm very grateful to him. Naturally, he's got some Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM in his army. It's going to be a very necessary thing when you're attacking a settlement which is as heavily defensible as this, because the Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM will of course keep your lower tier troops in line, as well as be able to stand up to enemy pressure a little bit better with those big shield value and the good arm values as well. Just having a look at what they've got in, well, what he's got in front. He's got the Barrow Wights, which this is their hiding animation, which looks a little bit strange, but they are here. And they're going to be obviously very important as well because they act as a fantastic melee tar pit. Very difficult to bring down, and in a situation like this they can be invaluable. It's in an offensive situation like this where Angmar can really shine if you've got the right composition for the job. Obviously the Snaga Stalks as well. Even their fodder like this has got a little bit more killing power than their contemporaries, like the Orc fodder for example. And then over here we've got another unit of Snaga Stalkers. Obviously in a situation like this the Blackwatch Legion are going to be absolutely vital. I've seen some murmurings of discontent about how units like this can push through lines, but honestly if this unit wasn't a thing, the battles would be very, very static and unmoving in certain situations. The attackers, at least the Orcs especially, need a unit like this to be able to give themselves some leverage to push forward, because they don't really have as much quality in melee as other factions, and they would get ripped apart slowly if they didn't have access to units like this. The Trolls have always performed a very similar function to the Blackwatch Legion, and obviously stuff like the Black Legion of Barad-dûr as well. It's just now it's becoming a little bit more important that people are picking up on it. Obviously the Angmar Halberds back here as well, a nice armor piercing unit that they can use en masse. Nice cheap armor piercing polearm. It's got some Gundabad Guard as well, which you don't actually see too much of. Most people tend to prefer selecting more Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM. But the Gundabad Guard have that anti-cavalry bonus that spears have, obviously a little bit less killing power, but they do add a little bit more to the pushing power of the army as well. In tandem with the Blackwatch Legion, this makes it a very nice brute force army indeed. Obviously the general is going to be in the Witcher-Elm Blackguard, which again very, very good in this situation. And there's some more Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM, but of course once again we've got the two Trolls of Gundabad and the Trolls of Angmar, the defensive and offensive focused Trolls. Now going up here we can see another Orc army, and this is going to be Uhtred, or Uhtred? I don't know. He was playing as Mordor, he's not from Mordor. But obviously we can picture that there's going to be something quite similar. He does have a skirmish force, which is good. It's good to see that he's at least brought some archers to offset the fact that Second Pink has not brought any on this side, because this will mean of course that if it comes down to it they can engage in a skirmish fight and put pressure on the enemy lines from afar. He's also got some morale on archers, so a little bit better archers there, and also the Orc Javelins, which particularly in the late game could be very useful for bringing down the final choke points. The Nazgul, good to see them of course, fantastic if they can be embedded into another unit. The Olag High, which I think are stronger overall than either of the two Angmar Trolls, although the Trolls of Angmar might be a little bit tougher, but I think the Olag High have got the best stats all around of the Trolls at the moment. Temple Executioners of course, fantastic infantry unit. Naturally we've got some Orc fodder, they are free after all, but don't expect them to get too many kills in this situation. 2 units of Sauron's Will, a unit of Black Legion of Barad-dûr, Orc fodder, and then more Trolls, so some Troll Drummers and some Mountain Trolls. Good to see this amount of Trolls, they can be very, very useful in a choke pointy battle like this. And then way on the other side, we do have another evil faction. We've got Tangerine, who is playing as Rune, and he's got some Loknarim, so again, a little bit of a skirmish force, although they don't have the shields the Variag mercenaries do. They are a little bit better in terms of the damage they can do. And Rune's infantry is certainly going to be able to dish out quite a lot of armor-piercing damage, depending on who's defending. We'll have to have a look in a moment. Eastron Warriors, not great at taking arrow fire, it must be said, but they do offer a little bit more strength in melee than the Eastron Clansmen, but we'll see. In a situation like this, attrition can be a real problem. They've got a ballista as well, so potentially again useful if they can get it into the right position, but again, we'll have to wait and see on that one. They do have some Eastron crossbows as well, so some armor-piercing missiles, but again, very bad under archer fire. They've got the Gamp Brim, which of course, those armor-piercing halberds are going to be important depending on who is defending. Some Eastron Hunters, a lot of skirmishers here, a lot of ranged presence, which will be interesting to see if he hasn't maybe doubled down a little bit too much on this. He doesn't have much, or at least doesn't have enough infantry in my opinion, to make a sort of consistent assault, which they need to do on both sides, otherwise the Orcs will get focused down. Runic War Chariots could punch through the lines, but that's very, very risky on a map like this, so interesting army so far. I'd be interested to see how this actually does work out. He has got some Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, which the skill on these guys is very, 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 very high, over 20. But again, they can't be focused down, as I found to my detriment in the most recent Conquest video I did. A couple of Scion Rim, which this is a little bit more like it, a little bit more what you'd expect from an attacking army in this situation. Good, decent at pushing their way through the lines as spearmen, and obviously very, very tough as well. A couple of units of Flag Rim in the background, some Clansmen without any upgrades though, some Eastron Guard, and then finally the General's Bodyguard, going to be the Carmel's Chosen. Not as strong as the Witchround Blackguard, but they aren't as expensive either, I don't believe. I think they're like 100 florins cheaper or so. They are still a very strong infantry unit, of course, and we shall see how this goes. However, in through the entrance, we can see that it is going to be Gondor, played by Thick Dick, and Pigbot PL777 keydrop.pl. I'm just going to call him Pigbot for the remainder of this fight. So both of these factions are more emphasis on armor, so it's good news for Rune, who are obviously going to be relying on what armor-piercing damage they can do. Gondor Spearmen obviously good at holding the line with their mass. They've also got both levels of armor upgrade with their full plate. They've got some Orc Hunters as well. Not so much of an emphasis on armor, these guys, but they do have very good damage. Moving a little bit further back, the Hammers of Gundabad, heavy emphasis on AP. I'm actually a little bit surprised not to see them going up against Angmar with this much AP. They would be a little bit more useful over there than facing off against what will presumably be the more lightly armoured first waves of Rune. But they do have the 4th Legion, sans the armour upgrade, but they are still a fantastic holding tool as well. So we shall see. We've actually got some cavalry in the settlement as well, although they are some crossbows, so KHAZAD-DUM's lack of foot crossbows probably necessitated this pick in their mind to have some AP missiles. Obviously the movement of these guys is not going to be that important, but the damage they can deal is still significant. Some 2nd Legion Axe Guard, obviously tough, very tough. They can stick around in a fight, I think, a little bit longer than the Hammers of Gundabad can, with their heightened sort of defensive values, particularly with the shield. If they're under archer fire, they can last a little bit longer, but I don't think they do as much damage as the Hammers of Gundabad, and the Hammers of Gundabad have got a few other little things as well that give them a reason to be picked. 4th Legion Shield Guard, and obviously the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers in this situation, especially on home turf in Moria. They're going to be very, very useful in the choke points. Back here we can see presumably where the stronger units are going to be at, and indeed we do have the Fountain Guard, unsurprising to see them there, the heart and soul of the Gondorian army. And also we have the Elisar's Vanguard and the Wardens of the White Tower. The Elisar's Vanguard does have the General and Aragorn in it. The Wardens of the White Tower obviously still a fantastic unit, stronger than the Carmel's Chosen. And then we have the Nimlothian Honor Guard as well, so all of the Gondorian elites really are on display here, including the Fountain Guard. We'll see if they maybe have put a bit too much of an emphasis on elites, because they've also got some Citadel Guard over here, which are of course AP, quite expensive. Athelian Rangers, have they got enough cannon fodder, or at least disposable units that they can use throughout the field? Guards of Osgiliath, not actually that expensive, but you can't mass them up too easily. You can only have 2 before they hit the red limit. And then finally over here we can see the final stages of this defence. We can see the Legion Bodyguard, which is where Balin is going to be, the KHAZAD-DUM General, and then finally we have some Gondor Infantry, all of which have got the full plate armour upgrades. Gondor Archers do not, but they have formed up some nice positions over here with the stakes. 2nd Legion Axe Guard, and then finally we have over here the Orc Hunters of KHAZAD-DUM, some Sons of the Fallen, KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers, Hammers of Gundabad, and some 1st Legion Pikes, 2 units of them, and some more Sons of the Fallen. So this is a very strong defensive army indeed, which it will need to be. because of course when you're outnumbered you need to be able to deal with, particularly considering it's going to be all evil factions they're going up against, numbers are not going to be an issue. Over here I think is where the attackers stand the best chance of breaking through in the long run. I think they definitely have all the tools they need to cause the defenders some real problems. Angmar focusing on the brute strength, of course, Mordor accenting that with some of their utility units and trolls, of course. Over on this side, however, Tangerine may have a little bit of an issue sustaining an assault for the reasons I mentioned. He's gone for a lot of ranged units, which could pay off in the long run. The skirmish damage that they do could be significant, but ultimately KHAZAD-DUM and Gondor are two of the best factions at weathering a storm of projectiles, so we shall see. And ultimately there isn't much in terms of infantry here that is going to cause too much trouble to any of the elite units should they come down here. The Carmel's Chosen, really the only unit of note there. The Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are good, but as I've said, all it takes is for them to be singled out from archers, and that will be an expensive unit wasted. We'll see though. It's a difficult unit to use, difficult army to use in this situation, I think, that Tangerine has picked, but he could make it work if he's maybe a little bit more patient, and they will have to be on the other side. Just having a look. Yeah, they're still approaching. So we will stay with Rune, because they are actually going to be the first ones to break down one of Moria's gates. Naturally, this unit of Eastron Clansmen without either of the armour upgrades is going to be made quick work of by the initial defences over here. Orc Hunters are falling back, but yeah, we can see here that the Gondor Spearmen forming up a shield wall on either side. And even with the malice that spears have, these Gondor Spearmen will still be able to easily hold against Eastron Clansmen. And even the Eastron Clan Warriors, the dual sword variant, they'll do a little bit better, but the Gondor Spearmen should still be able to hold them at bay for an extensive period of time. Depending on how Rune wants to approach this, however. Slowly but surely the Dwarven Gates will be felled. 46,000 frames is a fairly long battle, of course, but then this is fairly typical for what's happening on Moria. Amazingly, Angmar actually did break through the gate first, which is strange. Well, they actually broke through it at exactly the same time. How about that? Yeah, these Gondorians shouldn't have too much to fear from a single unit of clansmen. We'll see if Rude deploys the numbers necessary to maybe overwhelm these two units, because Dwarven reinforcements, well, it's unlikely that Rune are going to get through here quickly. With the Hammers of Gundabad and the 2nd Legion on hand to help them out, the Gondor Spearmen should be able to hold relatively easily. The Eastron Clansmen are there. The Hammers of Gundabad might be targeted by the Runic skirmishers as they move forth. Indeed, that is going to be the... Well, actually, are they going for the Gondor Spears? They are. Now, the Gondorian Spears have got both levels of armour upgrade. They have a pretty decent shield value as well, and they're in shield wall, and they're being attacked exclusively from the front. So this may look concerning from a Gondorian point of view, and you can see that some of these spearmen are falling, but the armour and the shields do give you more of a margin for error. I mean, honestly, if you're thinking of targeting a unit, you really don't want to be going for these spears, because even if you do manage to do extensive damage to them, the spearmen are not really going to be the biggest threat to you in melee. The biggest threat is going to be something like this, the 2nd Legion Axe Guard, which if you just tilted your skirmishers just a little bit, you would have had a nice shot on them. They do have a shield value, but it's much lower than that of the Gondorian Spearman, and they are a much juicier target to go after, much more deadly in melee. Meanwhile, on the other side, we can see that we do actually have a bit of a melee going on, and the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers caught with their pants down as the Snaga Stalkers managed to come in and get them in melee. Now, naturally, any casualties they can inflict here are going to be substantial losses. The Snaga Stalkers, really a throwaway unit, and they are managing to hound these KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers, so an early mistake here from the Dwarves. I mean, this is definitely not a unit you can afford to lose cheaply. Having said that, this is a very long V-shaped formation here, and it's made up of very, very strong units. Individually, some of these KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers have gone down, which is a victory, but now these Snaga Stalkers are going to get absolutely crushed in between two units of Sons of the Fallen and two banks of 1st Legion Pikes, and the Hammers of Gundabad as well, so they're going to last virtually no time at all. I mean, they're already wavering. Unsurprising. and they're fighting to the death. I mean, that is actually kind of a loss for Angmar, because they managed to kill off some of those KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers, but the Snaga can be very useful provided they are just sort of used to offer a meat shield in melee for other more substantial units, but here they've just been cut down without really earning their keep to a huge extent. We'll see. I mean, the KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers, it's not a terrible loss, but it's still something I would have pulled the Snaga Stalkers back after they'd managed to do some work. Interestingly enough, the Gondorian Spearmen have decided to abandon their position at the gate, which is unsurprising. I mean, leaving just 2 units over by the gate was probably not the best choice anyway. They would have been overwhelmed eventually by Rune, and it's much better to sort of layer your defence with more substantial layers. Like, having less layers to your defence but having them be thicker is preferable to having a series of very, very small defensive layers, because the attackers will just slowly but surely smash through them one by one. Mercenary crossbowmen pulling back. What is that? That sounded... Ooh. Indeed, we do have the Eastron crossbow, so it was definitely a necessary withdrawal from both Gondor and KHAZAD-DUM. You don't want to give Rune the cost efficiency on these crossbows, because they're something which you can easily control on Moria enemy crossbows. You can keep them at bay for decent amounts of time, especially the runic ones with their lack of survivability at range. The KHAZAD-DUM archers and the Gondor archers will easily kill them at range. So it will be difficult for Tangerine to make the most of them, but if he saves a unit of crossbows for the late game when everyone's ammunition has run out, they could be the sort of thing which makes the town centre fairly impossible to defend. Meanwhile, a little bit of a lull in proceedings here. Are Rune going to advance in? They are indeed. Good. I was fearing we might have needed to make a cut there, but we don't. Rune coming in, and it's going to be the Eastron Clansmen, of course, the throwaway first unit in. 99% of the time Rune are playing in an offensive siege. They are a little bit more durable and dependable to my mind than the Eastron Warriors. The Eastron Warriors do have their place, but I feel like in this sort of situation you want the Clansmen just because they won't do as much damage, of course, but they will be able to absorb that projectile fire. And especially if you upgrade the armour of them as well, 2 levels, the Eastron Clansmen become one of the better militia units in the game. The Eastron Hunters immediately withdrawing because the Hammers of Gundabad are coming forward now. The Eastron Clansmen were being used as a protective buffer for the skirmishers only, so this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. But the Eastron Clansmen are naturally not going to stand up to the Hammers of Gundabad all that well. You can see actually that there are some projectiles being fired in from the Eastron crossbowman, but the crossbows don't really have the best angle with which to hit the Hammers of Gundabad. You can see the Eastron Clansmen are already trying to fall back, trying to give the crossbows a decent shot, and they could get some decent hits into the back of the Hammers here. They also got some friendly fire, however. But again, it's really just sort of posturing off against one another, and this I imagine is going to be the tail of Rune's assault over on this side, purely because they have such a heavy emphasis on their skirmishers. They can't afford to be too reckless with their infantry because they simply don't have enough of it. If they go right into the jaws of all of these units, they could end up taking some pretty substantial losses. The archers are on the hill, of course. KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers. They don't have to deal with the same level of elite troops that the orcs have to on the other side. But all of these spears are still going to be able to pin the runic army in place for a fairly substantial amount of time. Eastron Clansmen are going to be under fire here from the Orc Hunters. In a certain sense of the word, this is a bit of a waste of ammunition from the dwarves, but I mean, there are some of these Eastron Hunters coming in now, so the Orc Hunters are going to need to respond to the runic archers in some capacity, and now you can see here, sort of like the tide coming in and out. The dwarves are just sort of sending Rune back out of Moria with their tails between their legs every time they enter. And of course, the Second Legion are going to move forward. The crossbows are sort of in position, but once again, they don't have the best angle with their own troops in the way of their arc of fire. So really, this is just going to be a case of trying to force the enemy into making some mistakes. Here come the arrows, of course. Overall, Rune is trying to bait one of these dwarven units into making a mistake serious enough for them to be able to kill off one of these very dangerous shock units for free. And then this defence becomes a lot more scary, because it is primarily comprised of spears after all, which won't have the most killing power, especially not against some of the better runic units like that Flag Rim. Let's head back over to the other side, however, because it looks as though, indeed, we are going to see an assault. KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers are once again in front of the army, although, again, this is a very questionable use of the KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers ammunition. I mean, the Orc Javelins are essentially being allowed to pay for themselves very, very easily by throwing their payloads into the KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers. This unit has taken some substantial losses. They've been very reckless with this one unit in particular so far, but it looks as though the second wave is now on the way. The Orc Javelins still firing away. They're trying to get some hits on this section of the line. Ultimately, the Orc Javelins will eventually be dealt with by those Gondorian archers, however. And it is only Snaga Stalkers as well, and this is a very tough line to break through. I mean, the 1st Legion Pikes and the Sons of the Fallen. It's going to be very difficult to override this defence. They will manage it eventually, of course, I've little doubt. But it's how many kills they can get on the way through. It is an intimidating looking defence, so I can understand why the Orcs are trying to get some value from their armour-piercing projectiles over here, but even then, the Sons of the Fallen are tanky enough to withstand that. The Orc Javelins, of course, they are armour-piercing, but their base damage is still quite low and they're not very accurate as far as Javelins go. Cheap Javelins have their uses, of course, but a bit of a skirmish fight going on here, and of course the Eastron Clansmen charging forward. So now the Runic skirmish line is trying to get settled, trying to skirmish with the Dwarves, and honestly, the Orc Hunters of KHAZAD-DUM not the greatest in a skirmish fight. Again, probably the one KHAZAD-DUM unit which doesn't have substantial armour other than the miners. But over here you can see the Eastron Clansmen, there was only really going to be one outcome to this fight. 2nd Legion Axe Guard is stomping them into the dirt, in and amongst the stakes. Yeah, they're going to break. The Runic Archers are going to need to be careful, because if these Eastron Clansmen break and the 2nd Legion continue their advance forwards, the Archers are going to be caught up in melee, and here they go. Rune are sending up another unit of Eastron Clansmen, but are they going to get there in time before the first line of the Archers gets engaged by the 2nd Legion? Well, they are going to get there. I think the 2nd Legion were thinking about retreating there, but they needn't. The crossbows are not in a good position to fire on them at all, and the 2nd Legion are killing off a lot of Rune's disposable units here, and if you rob Rune of their low tier units, they will then have to try and send in their better units, stuff like their Flagrim, right into the jaws of a fairly defensible position over here, which they would much rather save till later, I'm sure. And obviously the 2nd Legion, they're going to be able to deal with these Eastron Clansmen for a long time. Fire arrows are coming in now, which is a pretty decent choice. Fire arrows should cause extra morale shocks to these Runic units. The Eastron Warriors are coming forward now, and it's a fairly intimidating level of troops that are coming forward, but even so, I'd still expect the 2nd Legion to hold against these two units, and even if they felt like they wouldn't, they could always send up the Hammers of Gundabad afterwards anyway. Meanwhile, we now have an engagement, or we did have an engagement. The Orc Javelins, which presumably were out of ammunition, were then charged into the front line, and it went about as well as you can expect, considering it was 1st Legion Pikes backed up by Sons of the Fallen. Now there are Barrow Wights in here, however, and I think they are getting ready to mount a more substantial assault, at least I hope so, because if the Barrow Wights stay there for too much longer, then the defensive skirmishers would definitely be well placed shooting them, because that is one of the ways in which you can deal some nice damage to them. They have a very hefty amount of hit points after all. 3 HP is difficult to chew your way through. The Barrow Wights are really difficult to get rid of in a sustained melee fight. It's one of the really good tools that Angmar has. They're being changed a little bit in the future. There are plans to change them a little bit anyway. But ultimately their function will not change. They will always be a bit of a nightmare to deal with in melee. That's the whole point. They won't get very many kills. They've got really dreadful offensive stats that they can be really annoying to get rid of. And indeed at this point I believe the entire point behind them is to actually form a defensive buffer for the skirmishers that they've got in here. And I assume the skirmishers are going to try and deal with stuff like the 1st Legion Pikes and the Hammers of Gundabad. Again, the 1st Legion are another polearm unit which do have a shield value, but it is a relatively minor one. Their armour values are high as well though. Again, I can see why they're doing this, because the likelihood of them being able to use their skirmishers in the late game is relatively limited, considering Moria's shape. So they want to get as much value off them as possible here. But I think, well, I mean, it's difficult for the defenders, because obviously if you go for the Barrow Wights you can kill off a potential nuisance later on, but you're then leaving the Orc skirmishers to basically do what they will. So I can understand why the defenders are taking the approach that they currently are. Meanwhile, It looks as though the 2nd Legion fell back at some point. Yes, they did. They fell back to the 4th Legion shield wall, and now the Gondorian Spearmen and the Hammers of Gundabad have taken their place. Rune have come forward in fairly substantial numbers over here, and they've committed forward their Gamp Rim as well. If the Orc Hunters still have ammunition, they would definitely be well placed by trying to go for them, or certainly the crossbows, which have meandered their way forwards. And now, the Gondorian player needs to pay attention, because these Gondor Spearmen are out in the open, and Rune once again have fallen back to try and give their crossbows a nice shot. But once again, the defenders are wise to that, and they are going to pull back. Again, very cagey opening to this fight. The attackers trying to use their skirmishers. Over on the other side, however, once Mordor have exhausted their arrow supply from their Orc archers, there is really only one thing they can do, and that is to just try and smash the defensive lines to pieces with brute force. But Orc archers, naturally are not really known for dealing out incredible amounts of damage, especially not when they're firing directly into the front of one of the most heavily armoured units in the game, in the Sons of the Fallen. There are also plentiful fire arrows coming in here. And of course the defensive skirmishers can scarcely miss in a situation like this. If they don't hit the Orc archers, they will hit the Snaga Stalkers or the Barrow-wights. Too good a target to pass up. But with their numbers, Angmar and Mordor should feel fairly confident about taking this area down here. There's more room to manoeuvre here than there is anywhere else within Moria, and the defenders have elected not to try and hold this smaller choke point over here, so they should be able to, as soon as they make a small hole with their Trolls or with their Blackwatch Legion, I imagine this defence is going to be overrun. So it behooves the defenders to have a backup plan here, maybe to try and retreat once they see that happening to these 2 choke points here. We shall see. Interesting actually how Rune have been more aggressive thus far than the armies on the other side, even though they have less tools to be aggressive in the way that they are being. The Scion Rim and the Gamp Rim are combining their forces to try and get through the Hammers of Gundabad. Now the Scion Rim are very tough, but they really won't like fighting the Hammers of Gundabad at all. The armour piercing values on them are substantial. The crossbows are firing away, and they are firing into that very densely packed unit of spearmen. Now they are having to arc their shots, so it's not going to be quite as effective as it would otherwise be, but they're still inflicting casualties over here. A lot of dead bodies here, and it looks as though they're getting ready to pull back across the bridge. So despite Rune's army composition thus far, they've definitely made the most of it. The Golden Boys pulling their weight in a fight, even with all of the Dwarven controversy which has been buzzing around lately. Eastron Hunters getting into melee to offer a little bit more of a meat shield, offer themselves up to the Hammers of Gundabad rather than the Scion Rim. And here we can see the Merc crossbows are coming in. Their ability to quickly respond where they are needed is an interesting little advantage that they've carved out for themselves, but this one unit of Hammers of Gundabad has been rather left to their own devices, but they're fighting admirably here. The unit that pushed through them was admittedly only Eastron Hunters, which not exactly a melee powerhouse, but even so, it is the sort of thing which can instill panic in lesser units. The Hammers of Gundabad doing very well. The Scion Rim defeat seems certain. Eventually I imagine that's going to turn around. The attrition will probably tell, especially with the additional AP damage that the Gamp Rim are going to be providing. Are the crossbows out of ammunition? They've pulled out their little scimitars, so I would assume they are. There's also these Eastron warriors coming in. This is going to be really difficult for one unit of Hammers of Gundabad to continue to hold against. At this point, if they just intend to leave those Hammers of Gundabad behind, it might be an idea to retreat across the bridge, or at least put up a secondary defensive line in front of the bridge even. We shall see. Troll drummers still fighting away as we get stuck in the ceiling. Now, the Barrow-wights did commit themselves forward, so presumably the Orc archers do still have some ammunition, but the Barrow-wights trying to effect some sort of advance, and this could be a little bit of a mistake on the part of the Orcs. The Barrow-wights went forward all on their lonesome, and they are very strong, very difficult to bring down, and of course the Sons of the Fallen are still a spear unit, so they do still suffer from the Malice, even if they do have high enough stats to offset that. But the Barrow Wights will lose in the long run if they are supported properly. The Sons of the Fallen, that is, and the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers here. But naturally, as I'm sure you can see, Second Pink's Legion of Armoured Trolls are coming forward now. And they are going to be able to smash their way through pikes. This is what Trolls are really very, very good at. Or they could stay in melee with the pikes and deal a lot of damage that way. The problem with that would be, of course, that they are presenting themselves as big fat targets to the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers, and the Trolls do need to stay out of the field of fire from the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers, otherwise this could get quite ugly for the Angmar Trolls. Mordor do still have plenty of Trolls of their own, but it's this sort of advance that's coming forward now. You can see all of the heavy shields coming forward from the Blackwatch Legion. There's also the Troll Drummers coming up, so this is a much more genuine attack. And this is where the defenders need to think about trying to pull these units that are on the front lines back. They need to save some of these units like the Axe Guard and the Hammer Guard, because while the Hammers of Gundabad would certainly be able to defeat the Blackwatch Legion, they're pretty much tailor-made to go up against much more defensive units like this. It's everything that's following through with them. You can see there's Guardians of Khazad-dûm, Gundabad Guard. This is honestly what I was expecting the Orcs to do fairly quickly into this fight. But they are doing so now. The defenders are eager to try and hold this outer position, and I think this is a mistake. You need to realise when you're beaten. You can see that these First Legion pikes are some of the best pikes in the game, and they've just been smashed to splinters by the sheer volume of the Orcs coming forward. And this is what you always have to be prepared with in a situation like this, especially when you're up against two Orc armies coming from the same direction. Like if it's just one, you might be able to get away with maybe sort of layering your defence a little bit more. But if you're going to try and stop the Orcs on the outer defences like this, you need to commit most of your army to doing so. Otherwise, this is going to happen. And this is a fairly hefty chunk of the defensive forces which are essentially going to be defeated. They might be able to take a decent amount of these troops with them. These Blackwatch Legion were very quickly defeated by the Hammers of Gundabad, and that goes to show how badly they do against a really potent elite AP shock unit. But this is still going to be... this is not going to be pleasant for the defenders. Their very nicely crafted pike line has ultimately been shifted. And their pikes are still alive, but they are now not in formation at all. And the Trolls are still over here as well. And obviously the Trolls are ideal for dealing with pikes. I think at this point that it's well known that the fact that pikes are good against Trolls is false. That was a commonly held belief for quite some time, but it is simply not true. The Trolls just smash pike lines apart. They're able to engage them in melee as well. A pike line strength is that they can't really be attacked when they are in formation. But Trolls can circumvent that by simply pushing right up to the pikes and dealing with them. Sauron's Will are now moving forward, as well as the Black Legion, so the Orcs are very eager to push through. Over here, this unit of Blackwatch Legion and the Guardians of Khazad-dûm have taken, again, substantial losses. All of these AP Dwarven units have inflicted casualties on the Orcs. You can see over here that the Gondor archers are just firing into the blob. Not really a damage-focused archer, but still it will be a welcome amount of damage that they're doing. And against the Sauron's Will, that will be welcome as well, but the Barrow Wights are still looking very healthy and strong. 172 of them remaining. And now we have the secondary line, which, if a line made up primarily of Dwarven elites could not stem the tide, then a unit, well, lines made up of basic Gondorian infantry is certainly not going to be sufficient, and Gondorian spearmen. Even with the armour upgrade, this is not going to be enough. Meanwhile, over on this side, it's all happening now. The defenders did pull back over the bridge. Rune are actually getting ready to go around the defences, which is very wise because the defenders did not really account for that direction at all. But pushing over the bridge of KHAZAD-dûm is obviously going to be difficult. The Scion Rim and the Gamp Rim did very well against the Hammers of Gundabad, and they are now pushing forward, and they should be able to do decently against these Gondorian spears again. But that's not going to help matters for Rune. The KHAZAD-dûm Reclaimers throwing their axes in, and that might be enough to stop this runic attack. There are those chariots there as well. Rune can afford to be pretty pleased with their work so far, I think. Considering the fact that their army is not exactly Not exactly a typical army that you would use to assault Moria with all of those lightly armoured skirmishers. They've made it work thus far. All of those arrows raining in on this defensive line, but again, Gondor and KHAZAD-DUM can stand up to that sort of punishment better than most. And now, of course, now that they've sort of set up shop on that side of the chasm, they can get their ballista to do some work as well. So, oh ye of little faith. Now then, let's see what's happening over here. Naturally, this is a very common sight for the orcs to attack, swarming forth. And now you can see that this sort of last little strong point of dwarven infantry, the 2nd Legion and the Hammers of Gundabad, fighting side by side, but it is ultimately not going to be sufficient. Over here, you can see that the Orc Hunters that are out of ammunition are trying to help shore up this defensive line. The Gondorian Spearmen here trying to hold back the Black Legion, but again, this is not going to be enough in the long run. The defenders at this point seemingly are going to be putting all their eggs into one basket with regards to their elites. Now they do have a pretty sturdy final stand position with a lot of elite units, but it has to be said that that's primarily Gondor. The vast bulk of the dwarven value was actually over here on the front line. Those 2 units of 1st Legion Pikes, 2 units of Sons of the Fallen, a unit of Hammers of Gundabad, and a unit of 2nd Legion. That's a pretty hefty expense there that ultimately has served as little more than a speed bump for the Orcs. And that sort of defence could have done very well, but you need to realise that when you're up against Angmar and Mordor, if they choose to commit everything, you need to commit everything against them, otherwise you're just not going to stop them. Over here you can see the Witcher-Hound Blackguard are over here as well now, backed up by their Snaga slaves. And Gondor are outnumbering them over here, but the Witcher-Hound Blackguard are of course a very, very tough unit. And standard Gondor infantry is not going to be enough to beat them, nor is Gondor archers. In this sort of ratio, might be enough to do some damage, but I can't imagine that 2nd Pink is going to allow them to remain unsupported for too much longer. You can see that the Mordor skirmish line setting themselves up within Moria now. These Merc crossbows are getting into position, trying to fire in. And what are they firing at? They're firing at the Orc archers, aren't they? Well, they're seemingly firing at all sorts of things, but if they're trying to engage in a skirmish fight with the Orc archers, this is a terrible idea. I've said in the past how awful the mercenary crossbowmen are at withstanding arrow fire. And even when it's Orc archers, they're still going to drop like flies. And they're not going to get enough projectiles off quickly. So again, I think that this comes down to a bit of inexperience here, not really recognising what targets you should go after and when to retreat. I mean, it's clear now that they need to get out of there. Meanwhile, as we sort of hover over the chasm, you can see these Gondorian spearmen over here. With the assistance of the dwarves, have pushed Rune back slightly, but you can see now that the Flagrim are on the front line, and the Flagrim are pretty ideally suited to take on the Gondorian infantry. Maybe less so the KHAZAD-DUM infantry because of their much higher damage. And now even the Narim, which I mentioned are not exactly fit for a skirmish fight right at the beginning, they found their niche as well, because they are not under any sort of counterfire, and their slightly increased damage is going to serve them well here. In spite of my reservations, shall we say, about Tangerine's army, he's made it work so far perfectly well. Meanwhile, you can see now the Sauron's Will and the Black Legion are on the front line. They have actually been stopped in their tracks so far by the spears, but the spears are very good at holding for extended periods of time, but ultimately the damage from the Sauron's Will should be enough to bring them to their knees. Meanwhile, I think we're here just in time to see the last of the Dwarven resistance on their initial front line. The Olag High came forward to bring about their end, as well as these mountain trolls. Interested to see where the Angmar trolls have gone. They might all be dead. I mean, there was hefty Dwarven resistance here, but ultimately they were successful, so it was definitely worth it. Temple Guard, which I missed in the army section, as well as the Númenórean Shadow Guard, so Mordor definitely with a very skirmish-heavy approach. But over here, it works perfectly in tandem with Angmar, and you can see how I can only assume that both Second Pink and Uhtred over here, there was some manner of collaboration on their army composition, otherwise it was a very fortunate coincidence because their armies mesh together very, very well. They've got, obviously, the advantages of being as numerous as the Orcs are. Mordor coming in with a little bit more utility, whereas Angmar handling the vast majority of the brute force. Well, these mountain trolls over here, presumably trying to get into the KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers to deny them their firing, and this will of course have the added benefit of carving a hole in the defensive line. Let's go and see how Rune are getting on. Rune are through. Well, that was quick. The Flagrim doing their job. But Rune will probably run out of steam quicker than on the other side. I mean, you can see here there's sort of a lot of routing going on. But Rune have less in reserve than their Orc friends on the other side. They still have a decent amount of troops left. I mean, they've done very well so far at getting through. But the Carmel's chosen the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. They've got some Scion Rim as well. But ultimately, if they push forward too quickly, the elites in the town centre will be able to focus them down, and that will be a mistake. The best thing Rune can do at this point is wait for their Orc allies to begin assaulting the other side of the town centre, because then I don't really see any way in which the defenders can come back from this. But as it is, one of the only hopes they have, in my opinion, is that Rune recklessly charge right up this hill into the welcoming arms of the Fountain Guard, because Rune will find it really difficult to get through that Fountain Guard, to be honest. The chariots might be able to do something to disrupt these formations, but if the chariots get caught on the Fountain Guard, then it's all over for them very quickly. I mean, at this point you can see here that the Sauron's Will, that push from the trolls did terrible damage to the front line. It looks as though the mountain trolls paid the price for that, though, and the fact that they're mostly dead. Is that one last mountain troll? Yes, it is. So really that is what you can see happens to trolls. They can push their way, well, they can essentially win you a line battle, but they will die doing it. At this point, this unit of Gondor infantry is probably doomed. I don't think they're going to be able to retreat in time. These few Sauron's Will are blocking their retreat. Those KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers might be able to, though, and that would be a big save if they can manage that, if they still have some ammunition. Every little helps. But as for these poor Gondorians, they are now going to have to meet their demise at the hands of the Witchround Blackguard. Most unfortunate for them. Still some Merc crossbows alive. Meanwhile, what's left of the Mountain Trolls actually over here, trying to do some damage to the Legion Bodyguard, although you can see here that it's in fact, I don't think there's really any dead Legionnaires over here, maybe one or two. It's primarily troll corpses over here, and this is where the trolls can meet their match, especially the mountain trolls. If they come up against a really strong unit, they can look a little bit less scary. Sauron's Will marching forth at this point. One unit of Gondor infantry out of their comfort zone here. They're a very dependable unit, but they're never really going to do anything too spectacular, especially not when they're faced with an army of this calibre. Still Barrow Whites alive as well. That's going to be no fun for the defenders when it comes to the final stand. Barrow Whites are a real nightmare to deal with if you're trying to defend against them. Not impossible, but it's been difficult for the defenders thus far. There's still one troll left alive. I think the Legion Bodyguard are trying to get out of there, which they should. They can't afford to stick around, otherwise they might defeat the trolls, but a lot more fodder is coming to pin them in place. Now we have the first lines in. Now the Athelian Rangers, I'm not really sure how well they've been doing thus far. They definitely need to be picking their targets wisely, because getting a ton of kills off the Rangers, seeing a sort of 600 to 700 kill performance, maybe even more so from the Rangers, is what the defenders need to be seeing at the moment. We'll see, I guess, in the late game how many kills Gondor manage, and we'll see how much the Rangers will be propping them up. Naturally, this assault is not going to go anywhere. These Orc archers are immediately routed in the face of this very scary phalanx, made up of Citadel Guard and Guards Walskiliath. It is worth saying, of course, that all of the Gondorian elites are still intact. The Dwarven army's not looking so good anymore. They still have a few individual units, but nothing too substantial. And Rune are waiting, doing exactly the right thing. What is going on over here? I think actually there's been a fight over here that I've completely missed up to now. It looks as though the Ramas Ekor garrison are fighting, and this was a section of the Gondorian army that I completely missed, I suppose. It wasn't Ramasakal Garrison either, it was Pelagia Marines. I need to get myself... need to snap out of it. X-Men of Lasada, with the armour upgrades of course. Fighting on the front line. Their AP, useful against all of these runic units. But ultimately, the presence of the Dragon's Wrath Guildsman has essentially sealed their fate, as well as the Carmel's Chosen. All of the runic elites are over here, or both of the significant ones. It is worth saying that the Chariots clearly died here though, so that's a big expensive rune that they've essentially lost. Oh, there are Ramasakal Garrison archers, how about that? They're going to be used as a sacrificial lamb to ensure the safe return of the Gondorian javelins to the town centre. But ultimately Rune, it is interesting actually how Rune are clearly going to have the smallest army of all the attackers remaining at the end, and yet they will have to be the ones to attack two directions. We'll see how well they can manage against the Gondorian elites. I can't imagine Rune will have too much left by the end of this battle, but their contributions will certainly be important. The defenders, they've got a lot of strong units left, to be fair. A lot of very, they've got some 4th Legion, they've got obviously all of the Gondorian elites, Elisar's Vanguard, Wardens of the White Tower, and these Fountain Guardsmen are going to be very powerful as well. Legion Bodyguard too. But I still don't know. I mean, I still feel as though the Orcs have got just a little bit too much firepower for them at this point in time. The Temple Guard, I mean, again, some AP missiles won't go amiss. There's a lot of these halberds, which is a lot of AP, which will be useful. Obviously, if they're left to their own devices, they won't get very far against the Gondorian phalanx, but you can see here that we are sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of the second phase, as it were, of the Orcs' assault, and now laying siege to the heart of Moria. This is going to be difficult for them to get through, though. I mean, the Guards of Osgiliath are very capable pikemen in their own right, but it is the Citadel Guard here which is going to be the substantial thing with their AP in melee. As I'm saying this, I'm sure we can see the Numenorian Shadow Guards body piercing. Of course, they are the Mordor Rangers. This is a real problem, actually, for Gondor. This might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, or the anvil that breaks the camel's back, as it may end up being, because Gondor can't really afford to move from this defensive position. I mean, they might have to, but they clearly have sort of set their defence out with trying to defend both approaches, trying to force the Orcs up both sides rather than having the Orcs concentrated in one road. But this is going to be a real problem for them, because the Numenorian Shadow Guard have got that body piercing. Now yes, the Citadel Guard are shielded and armoured, but body piercing, this is pretty much a perfect angle for them here, and this could be a devastating blow for the defenders. And if that wasn't enough, I did also notice the fact that the Temple Guard are on the way up here, and they are not body piercing, but they are armour piercing. So that's basically both extremes of the Archer world coming together to lay waste to this Gondorian front line. Now, Numenorian Shadow Guard are being accosted by those KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers, but the damage may already be done. The Citadel Guard are standing up to this very well, actually. The Guards of Osgiliath probably a little bit less so. And on the bright side for Gondor, this is something that the Orcs are only going to be able to do on one side of this defence. The other side is going to be unharmed by the Mordor skirmishers, but lethal. Good use of the skirmishers there from Mordor. Well, see here that Rune are coming forward. Again, this isn't the most substantial assault. I mean, the ballista's there, but the terrain is not really in favour of a ballista over here. I guess this is Balin's tomb, but the ballista won't really be able to fire into the town centre too easily if the defenders hold their current position, which I imagine they will. The Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, I don't know, we didn't really see them when they initiated their combat, but they may still have ammunition, and if they do, again, that's more casualties, which the defenders won't really be able to avoid too easily. But having said that, Rune's manpower is running a little bit lower than that of the Orcs. Going up this road here with some Scion Rim, Eastron Guard, Hunters, and some Loka units as well. They still have an army left alive, which is of course important. I mean, Rune still need to be careful here, because if they are destroyed, this frees up a lot of resources for the defenders to use elsewhere, which will of course allow them to focus on the Orcs. And if they can continue to bottle up the Orcs, they might still have success here, the defenders. It's entirely possible. Numenorian Shadow Guard still being forced to sort of withstand the KHAZAD-DUM reclaimers. I've never really seen a more perfect demonstration of what body-piercing projectiles actually do, so that was nice. But they actually didn't inflict as much damage as I was fearing. So the rigidity there of this front line and the strength of the Citadel Guard, more than anything, showcased there to good effect. Meanwhile, there's some Athelian Rangers. Well, there's one Athelian Ranger who is essentially holding up the entire Mordor army. And I said that the other side would not be attacked with any sort of skirmishes, and it turns out I was wrong, because the Temple Guard have instead decided to move over here, although the Pelagian Marines have sent them packing. Things are a little bit more awkward for the Orcs than they would like, I imagine, but they still have plenty in the way of disposable units. I mean, they've still got fodder, for crying out loud, and Snaga. But having said that, I mean, naturally the Smaranon archers have been doing very poorly against the Citadel Guard. It's not the easiest front line to break down. You still imagine they're going to do it. I don't know. Interesting, this. Let's have a look at the percentages, shall we? Well, technically speaking, the attackers are in the lead, which at this point in a battle is often disastrous for the defenders. But based on the situation as it stands, I'm not sure. Because usually you see the attackers bring a lot of their might to bear in the late game, whereas here they did so early on, overwhelming that initial Dwarven front line, and eventually Rune doing the same on the other side, near the bridge. Eastron crossbowmen, again, they don't really have the best angle with which to fire in here, and the ballista won't be able to fire at all. Siege is temperamental enough when you have the enemy in a perfect position, but it's definitely not going to fire here unless they manage to find the perfect position with which they can fire down into the town centre, in which case that would be a truly horrible thing for the defenders. Meanwhile, this is one of the units that I do worry about if I was looking at this from a defending point of view. The Barrow Wights are not going to be easy to bring down. They won't inflict too much damage either, but they will at least make it very difficult to make the attackers go away anytime soon. Meanwhile, the Gondorian front line has held admirably as well, and they don't really have anything that's ready to attack over here. Fairly limited, actually. I mean, they do have Temple Executioners and Nazgul over here, of course, and they do have a lot of Orc fodder on hand as well, should they need reinforcements, but things have just slowed up a little bit in this battle. I think the attackers are just assessing things, because if they do charge in unthinkingly, this could be the end for them. This is actually a little section of the map over here, which I've never really seen used. This little bit over here. It's the sort of thing where you could like put a hidden unit over here and then reveal it in the late game if you're on the defending side. Still fighting noises going on over here. Very fearsome Gondorian phalanx. Meanwhile, the Temple Guard are firing, but the arc of fire is not ideal. Now, thanks to their AP projectiles, they should still be able to do some decent damage, but ultimately, as long as the Gondorians and Dwarves can prevent the Temple Guard from focusing down their front line, they'll take that as a victory, I think. I mean, the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers and the Pelagian Marines have already done their share of heavy lifting in the battle, and they're still getting value here for their team. Let's see what's going on over here. Well, now this is strange. These Orc Hunters of KHAZAD-DUM charged forward. Their very bold attack is about to come to an end. The ballista is obviously firing at them, which is not going to do their morale any favours. They are shaken, of course, but also because they are outnumbered in melee by the Oka-Na Rim, and also they're going to be attacked, presumably with some flanking fire from the Eastron crossbows. Looks as though that's the target, actually. Eastron crossbows are shaken as well. I mean, there isn't really much Rune can do until the Orcs start to make their moves, and you can tell here that I think the defenders are quite eager to try and pick Rune off piece by piece to try and diffuse the threat that they pose. Now this could be a very risky move here because the Ballista is here, and all it will take is a decent volley and this 2nd Legion Axe Guard will be a thing of the past. But needless to say, the 2nd Legion are far superior to the Lokanar Rim in melee. Yeah, the Axe Guard are pulling back now. It's a dangerous game because the temptation is to try and overwhelm these individual pockets of resistance, but if you chase them too far or get too greedy, it's only going to hurt you in the long run. The last thing they want to do now is give Rune a foothold. Rune are actually attacking up this side as well, into the phalanx on this side, which is comprised of Fountain Guard and 4th Legion Shield Guard. Certainly not the easiest thing to attack through. There's a pretty substantial runic attacking force. The Fountain Guard will not take any prisoners, and the Legion Bodyguard's presence as well as the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers mean Rune probably won't be able to affect a major advance through here. We shall see. Over here as well you can see the Carmel's Chosen have moved forward. Some strong crossbows getting into position, so I would assume that Rune are going to try and attack, which leads me to believe, of course, that the assault has begun in earnest over here. The Barrow Wights combined with the Witchround Blackguard on the front line, that's tough to get rid of. At this point I think the defenders' best bet is to hope that their 2 phalanxes over here hold for long enough for Rune to burn themselves out on the other side, and then they can shift more of their elites over here, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen. There is fodder coming up this side, which is naturally going to bounce right off of that Gondorian shield wall. Let's see. Where are all those halberds? They're all over here as well, I would assume. Indeed they are. Yangmar halberds obviously will make a very nice disposable unit here in the late game. And now the Numenorian Shadow Guard shifting their focus over here, and their body-piercing projectiles yet again proving to be a real menace for the Gondorians. And they've got a much better hit on the Guards of Osgiliath this time around as well, so the unshielded pikemen are presumably going to fall by the wayside. Naturally, this Orc fodder is kind of just banking up over here. They're not engaging. At least they're not engaging with anything that's sort of part of the phalanx. Those individual infantrymen have moved forward. But that Orc fodder is mainly just there to make sure that these units over here can't be used to reinforce any other area, because it's clearly over here that more of the attacker's strength is being marshalled. The Temple Executioners and the Witchround Blackguard fighting side by side, along with this amount of Barrow Wights, is not good for the defenders. They're going to need reinforcements down there if they want that phalanx to hold. And now the Olag High are on the way, so... but perhaps, more worryingly, other areas are now being compromised as well. Rune, with their more limited resources, are starting to do some damage as well. The Wardens of the White Tower and the 2nd Legion Axe Guard and the Athelian Rangers are going to try and stop the advance of the Cummel's Chosen and the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, which they should be able to, really. I mean, the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are a bit of a fly in the ointment because of their extremely high skill levels. I'm not sure whether the Gondorians have got an answer to that at this point. These Fountain Guard can't afford to stand on ceremony. At this point, you've already committed to these 2 phalanxes out here. The Fountain Guard are needed over here. They're one of the few units which might be able to give pause to some of these really dangerous units on the front line. Again, over here, this Orc fodder, it doesn't need to move in. All it needs to do is keep these units occupied. Honestly, at this point, again, you only need 1 unit to hold back this Orc fodder. The Citadel Guard alone would be enough. These Guards of Osgiliath would be much better placed trying to reinforce the other side, which, I mean, at this point, the Olag High are probably inflicting grievous wounds on the front line, and it's only a matter of time for the Temple Executioners, Temple Guard, and the Witchround Blackguard inflict enough casualties to make this line fall apart, and then this phalanx over here will be an extremely pointless endeavour. Over here, this runic front line, defeat is a distinct possibility. That is unsurprising considering the fact that it is Fountain Guard and Elisar's Vanguard holding the line, and the fact they're trying to push through with limited success. A few individual unit models are getting through, but not nearly enough. And this is going to really hurt Rune as they pull through this front line. And this might be the break that the defenders need, in a way. But these E-Strong crossbows are now in a decent position to start firing. The attacker's advantage has actually grown since last we saw. KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers and the Legion Bodyguard now moving in to patch up the hole. And there is now a bit of routing going on in the runic ranks. And at this point, if they can finish off this runic cluster of resistance, they will free up a lot of resources to defend other sections of the field. And the Cardinals Chosen have been overwhelmed now by the Wardens of the White Tower, as well as the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, so the Wardens of the White Tower proving their worth there. But the presence of these trolls breaking through this big front line is not the most comforting news, especially seeing as Temple Executioners have also managed to worm their way through. And there's still a lot of these disposable units as well, which is... It's not like the attackers are on their last legs desperately flinging their elites forward. They've still got a lot of manpower that they can commit where needed. It's still not a done deal yet, though. I mean, this could still turn around. This line, if this line falls before the defenders can stabilise the runic situation, though, then the attackers will win this, because the defenders simply don't have the ability to withstand the orcs pouring in all over the place. They need to form up a cohesive line if they hope to stop them. And they do still have elites, which could potentially give the high-tier evil units some pause. Now we can see the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers breaking off. They're going to join the Legion Bodyguard, which also went over here. Again, another one of the units which can give some of these elites pause. You can see here the Temple Executioners with their armour upgrade. A really fearsome looking unit. The Legion Bodyguard, I think they're going to pull back behind the Fountain Guard model. This, honestly, this wastefulness here, these Guards of Osgiliath and these Citadel Guard, which they essentially just left here for no good reason. As soon as they saw this line was falling, they should have got these guys out immediately. It's too late now. This could, I mean, with these two units, trying to force your way through this front line over here would have been a nightmare. Because they're pretty much out of trolls at this point. Their elites have also taken some substantial damage. They've still got some Barrow-wights, sure, but Barrow-wights are not exactly the scariest thing to take on from a damage dealing perspective. Rune's army is collapsing, which is unsurprising, but Rune have done their job. They've essentially drawn the attention of a lot of these resources over here. And now Rune have been destroyed, drawing off all of these elites' attention from the true threat, which was of course the Orc Horde. And now these guys are fighting back to back. The Guards of Osgiliath are going to have to try and hold these guys at bay. The Citadel Guard could get a decent amount of kills here on the Orc fodder, depending upon how things go. If the Orcs intend on trying to just sort of crush these guys over here, the Nazgul are in the fight as well. If the Orcs try and just focus on these units over here, it might be worth a counter-attack from the defenders' point of view. There goes the Runic General. Surely that's it for Rune. And now the defenders need to get all of their units and get them in over here. At this point they can't afford to just leave those units on that ramp, because otherwise the Orcs are just simply going to have too much. Even if they were able to kill the elites after this, the Orcs have simply got so much in the way of manpower from the Barrow-wights and the Angmar Halberds as well, which have come in here as like the final nail in the coffin. And it is an intimidating prospect to take on so many armor-piercing pole arms in the late game, as opposed to what people normally do with sending their lower tier units in. Second Pink here has decided to front load with sending in a lot of his elites at the start over there, including his trolls. And here in the late game, what on earth is going on there with those unit models? Holy shit. That is crazy. Does it only happen if I get in close? That seems to have sorted itself out. The Citadel Guard are armor piercing, of course, and naturally they will be doing decent damage to these very low tier units, but look at all this fodder. If the fodder ends up being what wins the Orcs the game, I don't know if the Orcs... Yeah, they don't have anything in reserve except another unit of Halberds. I don't know. I still think that the waste. And now I mean, the 2nd Legion are coming forward. I mean, they're trying to form up one last front line, which fair enough. I mean, we are now sort of within the final 10,000 frames, the final 8,000 frames. But I don't see how trying to turn this into a battle of attrition serves your purposes. At this point, you'd be better off attacking now to try and divide the attacker's attention somewhat. Because at this point, all these Citadel Guard are going to do, they will get a few more kills, but they will ultimately be destroyed. I don't know if they're a unit which has lot morale, they might be. But they need to attack the defenders at this point, because then they can try and do damage over here. And again, they're committing piecemeal. Committing in the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers only, and the Nazgul are over here. I mean, this is a really good opportunity to overwhelm the Nazgul in a fight. I mean, yes, the Temple Executioners and Temple Guard are over here, but you would much rather face this small pocket of resistance here than have to face this combined with this. I fail to see the logic in what the defenders are doing here. And anyway, well, actually, the attackers have made the choice for them by charging into the lines. So the defenders really getting a bit of a break here by having the right decision made for them. Now the Legion Bodyguard and the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers charging in to try and reinforce the line. I still think it's probably too late overall. But being proactive in a situation like this is always going to be preferable to just trying to be reactive. Because just forming up lines and hoping that they hold is, in my experience, has never really worked out in a situation where you're outnumbered to this extent anyway. We shall see. Temple Executioners' victory seems certain even in this situation when they tried to take on a Fountain Guard Phalanx head on, and there's Wardens of the White Tower on hand as well. I'm not quite sure what the Dwarves think they're doing. I mean, at this point it's do or die. You commit everything and try and hold out for as long as you can. Instead, I'm not entirely sure what the Dwarf player is doing. Trying to save his own skin, maybe? But your units are doing nothing useful back here. And as soon as this front line falls, they'll be overwhelmed and they will do much worse than they would have done if they were a part of this strong defensive line. Meanwhile, this is the end. There's just one Citadel Guardsman and he's going to be devoured by this horde of Orc fodder and Angmar Halberdiers. And now this is it. The final assault. The final unit of reserve halberds that they had are going to be committed forward as well, and I don't see a way that this defensive line is going to hold. I've seen weirder things happen, I suppose. Now you can see that the Mordor elites are just sort of peeling off a little bit. They've done a little bit of damage, and now they're going to let the fodder take the lead. Once again, the Dwarven player is being simultaneously insanely aggressive with his units and yet weirdly cowardly. I don't know what Pickbot's doing. Just commit your units, man. I mean, there is a school of thought that says maybe you should leave them in reserve and only commit them when the line starts to fall. But at this point you've got nowhere to retreat to after this front line has been dismantled. By the time you see a gap in the front line, it's already too late. Once again, the Barrow White unit models are going absolutely crazy in this big blob. But, I mean, this is going to be where we spend the rest of the battle pretty much. Coming into the final 5,000 frames, and the final defensive line makes its last stand. And this is going to be reasonably close. I mean, this front line, seeing as the Orcs are committing forward their lower tier units first, primarily. You can see now that the Barrow White's slipping their way through the line, and the KHAZAD-DUM Reclaimers will be there to put a stop to that. The Elisar's Vanguard is also over here. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these... The Gondorian front line will get a decent amount of kills on all of these Angmar Halberdiers and Orc fodder. But ultimately, they really don't have what it takes anymore to win this, I would say. Who knows, maybe if the Gondor Spearmen come back, the heroes, the unit of 17, some of these Númenorian Shadow Guard have managed to squeeze their way through the lines. I'm really not sure what the Dwarf player is doing. I'm really confused. He's like sort of going in and out, but you can see now that the Gondorian defensive line is creaking under the weight of all of these Orcs. They so desperately need the additional mass and killing power of these Dwarven units. But Pigbok, he seems content to not provide it. Angmar Halberds obviously taking a bit of a beating on the front line. It's good to see the LSR's Vanguard as well. From a defensive point of view, most people prefer the Nimlothian Honor Guard. Speaking of which, they were in the town centre at one point. Where did they go? I suppose they must have been on the front line with Rune over here, perhaps? Let's see if we can see some of their shields. Dead on the floor. Yes, here they were. So they must have taken some substantial damage from the chariots then. Cost the chariots their life, of course, but regardless, what the Gondorians would give for their Nimlothian Honor Guard at this point, and this is the price they will pay at this point. The dwarves not adding their weight to the front line is ultimately what's going to be the defenders' final undoing here, because they're just pushing through. And obviously the dwarves are tough, sturdy, and they've got some good mass behind them. And they would have made it far more difficult for the Orcs to do what they're doing. The Orcs don't have their Trolls or Great Shield units anymore, so this is something they shouldn't really be able to pull off. Yeah, the Dwarven player was content to try and leave his units in reserve, and unfortunately that... I don't think they would have won anyway, even if the Dwarven player had committed his units forward. But even so, come on man, it's time to stop. Just commit your Legion Bodyguard to the fight. Unless he's been so traumatised by the might of the Orcs that he simply doesn't want to face them anymore. These Gondor Spearmen actually did return. Perpetual routing can be undone by bumping into the unit and engaging it in melee. But unfortunately for the Gondorian Spearmen, the unit which made them snap out of their stupor was Temple Guard. So they're not going to be long for this world. This Legion Bodyguard, I don't know whether it's trying to get the charge bonus off, but it's a shielded unit. Its charge bonus is not all that fantastic. As we get into the guts of this fight over here. The polearm's continuing to do damage, and at this point the defensive line is still technically in effect. Although it's so horribly bent out of shape at this point. The end is nigh. The Gondorian Spearmen are putting up a decent fight against the Temple Guard. The Witcher and Blackguard are still alive. They've been in the fight for a long time in this battle, and they've managed to weather the storm. They've never been fighting on their own though, and that I think is the key when you look at most elites. When you've seen some of the elites from Gondor, or particularly from the dwarves early on, when they were isolated from one another and picked off. Obviously they were isolated, they didn't have the manpower to stand up all on their lonesome, whereas the Witcher and Blackguard have constantly had support early on from Guardians of Kharn-Dûm and Blackwatch Legion, and even in the late game, even though they are essentially surrounded with Orc fodder and Angmar Halberds. You know, it's a real shame the Legion Bodyguard didn't reinforce that line, because actually looking at this, they could have pulled this out of the bag, you know.
The battle is very much in our favour. Victory will be ours.
But as it is, the defensive line, they were going to live and die on that defensive line essentially, and the dwarf, you know, the lack of dwarves on the front line really hurt them, because the Orcs just bent the line out of shape. And at this point, they do still have the 9 Nazgul as well, which I don't think any one of the defensive units would have been able to take on anyway. If they were going to kill the Nazgul, they would have needed the Fountain Guard to stay in their phalanx and keep them at bay. But as soon as you let the Nazgul get in amongst you, it's going to be ugly. They've got very high stats, obviously. I think they've got 5 HP? I don't know. The Nazgul HP is substantially higher than most other things in the game. If you can't either cavalry charge them or isolate them from their Orc minions, they can be a real problem. The Gondorian general is dead though. Let's go up to ×2 speed. All of the action is happening within the camera at this point. The Elisar's Vanguard and the Legion Bodyguard putting up their final stand, and ultimately this was a pretty decent fight. I mean, if we have a look, within 10%, which honestly from the start, considering how the Orcs managed to punch right through all of those Dwarven elites, and
in command of the city.
Considering the fact that Rune also played very well considering their composition, I feel as though the defenders weren't all that far away. I mean, they had the army compositions to do it, and I feel as though this does demonstrate as well how powerful KHAZAD-DUM and Gondor are on the defence. They're really, really tough factions to bring down through sheer brute force, and the fact that they were able to withstand a combined assault from Angmar and Gundabad, well, Angmar and Mordor, I should say, for a decent amount of time does go to show how powerful they can be. And I feel as though they were one or two mistakes short of actually winning this fight. But we'll never know now. Still, a good fight nonetheless. Makes up for the lack of a scenario. There goes Barley, killed by one of the Nazgul no less. Yeah, obviously a nice classic map, one of the OGs. This, along with Minas Tirith, the old Caer Andros and Mountain Pass, were the ones that I remember most of all. And this is going to be the end. So victory for the attackers, victory for the blue team and for the attackers, so I'm sure that people are going to shout at me mercilessly down in the comments, but no matter. Rather akin to snake venom, I've built up a tolerance to it at this point. Now then. So let's have a look here, and Mordor getting the most kills, that doesn't surprise me too much because they had a lot of the skirmishes. Obviously the body piercing shots they were able to get off into the Gondorian front line was obviously pretty substantial, and the fact that they had Angmar to cover their skirmishes for them meant that they were able to focus a little bit more on that. Whereas Rune didn't really have that luxury. They had to do it all themselves, and they had to essentially attack the town centre down 2 avenues rather than just the one. And the bridge approach is, to my mind, a little bit more awkward to get through. You may have 2 roads into the town centre from that side, but it's a little bit narrower from the start, which does mean you can be focused down a little bit more easily. But Rune did well, all things considered. Defenders, like I said, Pigbot played pretty well. He got a lot of kills, but again, it's right at the end now. I feel as though if he'd committed those dwarves and shored up that front line, this could have been even closer than it was. I still don't think they would have won. I feel as though the power of the Temple Executioners combined with the Nazgul and the Witch Realm Blackguard probably would have been too much for them regardless, but it would have been interesting to see nonetheless. As for the Gondorians, again, losing those guards of Osgiliath and Citadel Guard, can you imagine if they had managed to save those 2 units? They would have won this game if they had saved those 2 units, because obviously the additional line holding capabilities of both units would have made that phalanx really tough for the orcs to push through. They didn't have any more pushing units in the end. They only had halberds and elites. They were only able to push because the dwarves seemingly didn't want to commit to the front line. So this was a fight of fine margins. If the Gondorians and the dwarves had just organised themselves a little bit better at the end, the defenders would have won this, and against all the odds as well, against a 2-pronged orc assault and Rune adding their own armour piercing flavour to the mix as well, which, you know, would have been interesting. Second Pink getting the lowest amount of kills, but again, as Angmar, he was the one that basically took most of the damage. He charged forth first of all, so that's unsurprising. Witch Realm Blackguard spent an elongated amount of time in the fight, and they've got the casualties to show for a 340. Very impressive. Probably the single most impressive melee unit on the field today. I'm not sure about ranged firepower. Elsewhere though, not a single unit breaking 100. And most of that does come down to the fact that he did have to charge into the Dwarven elites, and he also had to deal with the vast majority of the damage from the Gondorian phalanx on the route up to the town centre. The Barrow-wights did well, but as I said, the Barrow-wights not really focused around killing. They're focused around staying alive in melee for as long as they possibly can. So yeah, that was a very enjoyable match to watch, actually, considering Moria usually ends up being exceedingly grindy. That one was actually interesting to behold. I feel as though the attackers worked together very well in tandem, very little in the way of mistakes there, and again, it was only a couple of mistakes which cost the defenders this match to my mind. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which is almost certainly going to be the second showcasing of the Conquest game mode. So yeah, I hope you'll join me for that.